whenever, and it's related to censorship in many, many ways. When I ask questions, I'm genuinely asking questions. I'm not trying to be a contrarian on purpose, even though it may appear that way. And if I ask questions and I feel someone start to get uptight, start to get bothered about something, it bothers me. I'm like, why don't you want to talk about it? If you're so sure about your position, what is the problem with us talking about it? And that leaving religion for me was my first red pill. When my sister-in-law came down with brain cancer after the third birth of their son, she was my age. And so this was about 10 years ago, almost exactly, in 2013 of April. And she came down with brain cancer, terminal brain cancer. And I started praying and praying and praying. I bent the knee. Come on, man, let's do this. And she went. And I started asking questions about my faith. And at first I was angry at what I believed in God. I was angry. That's the truth. And then after about a week or so, I really started thinking about it, like, you know what? Maybe these things just happen. It's just natural way of things, unfortunately. And so I just accepted it. And so my parents remain highly religious, very devout. And anytime I I don't bring up religion with them. I told them, let's not talk about it because it causes disagreement. And they sometimes bring it up thinking that, we're going to convert him and he's going to come back and praise with us. And I try to tell them, look, it's not fair, because I'm going to retort everything you say. I know what you guys believe. I was raised in what you guys taught me to believe. I know exactly what it is. I just absolutely don't believe it anymore. And they get mad, they get uptight. And even friends that in this conspiracy thing, there's been a few times where people, I'll gladly have a discussion / debate on it. And then they back out for whatever reason. Some get angry about it. And that's just an example that I'm trying to give. And it's kind of related to conspiracies too. If someone is pro NASA or pro whatever, pro Iraq war, whatever you want to say it. And then you start asking questions and then they start getting upset. How dare you ask questions? That to me, that makes me like, wait a minute, I'm going to dig even deeper now because you're trying to censor me. You don't want me to think anymore. So if you're so sure about your position, I should be able to ask whatever I want and you shouldn't fear it. But if you're scared and you're getting angry about it, it kind of validates where I'm coming from in many ways. How do you feel about that, Doctor?
Well, I say my best experience of, trying to talk to people about it. And I think, first and foremost, my own kids, now they're in their 30s, right? So, but I had a big influence, especially on my younger son, who ended up being an engineer himself. And he started questioning things because it all made sense. Everything I would talk to him about these things. So I was going through this stuff about, buildings just simply can't act that way, right? And I remember he came up with the bright idea. He was going to college and he thought he was he wanted to talk to his physics professor about this. He had this great idea that these people are like that are questioning the story are like Galileo. The church is going to reject his idea that the Earth is round, or that the Earth revolves around the sun. He's going to reject his looking at the telescope and seeing the moons of Jupiter and all that. They're just going to reject that. And he says that's just what's happening now. People are, the church is like the government or whoever don't accept these people questioning the official story, even though it makes pure sense from all the evidence that this official story is wrong. The physics professor just shot him down. I mean, just took him thumb and said, "No, you are wrong. You can't do that." Ridiculed him. This is a physics professor at the college, otherwise a normal probably guy. But he realized, what he did? Shut up. Don't bring these up. What good is this information? And to this day, I can't talk about it with him. He said, it's like he wouldn't question the COVID. So it's like, I said, well, don't you remember it was like 9/11? It's like, when you question it, but then they wouldn't let you question it. No. You don't want to talk about that. It's like that's forgotten. That's, he learned that lesson. The same thing. What are your parents going to do about it? It's like you were talking, my childhood, I have some questions about my childhood. I don't think I was told, hey, your parents want to talk about that? No. They want to talk about all these things that, that they avoided thinking about, like whatever stories they accept, whatever their belief system. There are a lot of things people accept on faith. That's what he said. You take a faith versus this sort of scientific method. You accept things on faith, and that means you don't question it. You don't question faith. But the first, the college teaching job I had was in the University of Alabama in Huntsville. That's where I started college teaching. And 90-some% of my students were fundamentalist Christians, Presbyterians, Baptists, Methodists, but fundamentalists. I mean, they accepted the Bible as literally true. And so
Dinosaurs
they rejected evolution. What?
Dinosaurs were on
whatever's
the
in the Bible is the literal truth. God wrote it as perfect, or ever guided the hands of man who wrote these stories. Anyway, so, and I thought, oh, I'm going to be a kind of progressive college professor down in this world. I'm going to talk about the Bible as, as history, like who put together the Bible. There's all this stuff out there about, the Bible is a composite of this and that and that. And who's Jesus? I had this great, documentary that I was watching. PBS did this thing about who's Jesus. Look at historical Jesus. What do we know about historically? And I remember I started showing this. I was teaching world civilization, Western civilization. So it was fair game to talk about this kind of stuff. And I thought, I'm getting a little chancy. Maybe the students might be a revolt against it. They loved it. They absolutely loved it. Did they accept it? No. But it was an interesting story. They could take a class on evolution and they could question that. They could not, they don't have to accept evolution. They could find it kind of interesting to see how other people think about things. And I thought the historical Jesus, historical Bible was kind of interesting thing to learn about. So that's great. I can have a conversation with you, because they're totally confident in their faith. They said there's nothing at all that I could ever do to challenge their faith, question their faith. Interesting. I could talk about this stuff. I know people talk about kind of stuff in college. They talk about evolution and stuff, but there's nothing I could do. I can't possibly. It's like, great. I'm glad I don't have to fear, having you get upset because I'm telling. And that's the way most people work. You just accept things on faith. You accept what the government says on faith. If you're a Republican, you accept what the Republican. You take Fox tells you accept on faith. If you're a Democrat, you take what CNN talks on faith. You take it on faith. You don't question. You don't question. You don't question. You're right. And that's the way most people have to work. I dig and stuff, but I end up coming up with answers using evidence that most people are not going to understand, even if I try to simplify it, even if I try and present it in a way that, people could possibly die. They don't want to really. They don't, they'll see what can I use this for to support my view about whatever it was that they already believed in. That's most people. That's common. That's human nature. I think that's the way we survive in the world. We block things out. We don't try to, understand things that we really don't want to try to understand. Right? So, I mean, it's, I've had conversations like you have with my parents, where about politics, my mother was a devout Republican. I said, well, I know all the arguments for both sides. I can argue, I can be the devil's advocate for whatever side. And, she didn't want to talk about that, that makes her feel uncomfortable. So you stop talking about it. And she stops talking about it to you too, right? Because I'm going to do this. Like you said, I'm going to do this to you. If you come at me, I'm going to come back at this, right? So that's just human nature. So you end up being all by yourself in a little world, maybe talking to somebody with a conversation where you can raise part of these questions you might have, other questions we put aside.